Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. Today we're covering another grammar pattern. So what we're going to learn how to say today is Y despite X or Y in spite of X using the construction X plus the Japanese phrasing ni mo kakawarazu plus Y. So just to give a little context to this, that phrasing that we have in Japanese right there, ni mo kakawarazu, is actually kind of a grammar pattern that is based on another grammar pattern in and of itself, because what we have there is basically just the verb kakawaru, which is going to translate to basically to be influenced or to be affected, implication of course by something else. That's just going to be that verb word in its zu form, which I believe we have covered before, the grammar pattern in which we say the zu form of a verb plus another verb means to do that second verb without doing the first verb. So if we take that little interpretation and apply it to this word we have right here, which is kakawaru, which means to be affected by or to be influenced by, that's going to mean without being influenced by or without being affected by. And that's kind of a less natural translation of in spite of, despite of. When we say Y despite X or Y in spite of X, what we mean by that is essentially that Y happened despite the fact that X also happened, or despite the circumstances that were established by X. And of course the implication there is that normally you wouldn't expect Y to happen when we have the circumstances of X, but it did. So that's what this grammar pattern is in English and Japanese, basically. That's the meaning that we're going for here. So just to drop a few more little notes before we jump into the example sentences, some common translations of this grammar pattern are of course the ones I've already said, in spite of, despite of. Some other ones include although, though, and nevertheless. Second little note is that this grammar pattern is usually or generally used in formal language. So you might not hear this too often in everyday speech. I believe the much more common no ni grammar pattern, which means even though, is probably going to be used in lieu of this one in a lot of cases, just because it's more simple. And yeah. And last little final note here, which is actually a pretty important note, is just the general construction of this grammar pattern. So what we can use with this grammar pattern is pretty much anything. We can use adjectives, nouns, and verbs. We can also use this at the beginning of a sentence to link to the previous sentence. And in that case, what would usually be translated to is kind of nevertheless. So yeah, we see here that when we use this with verbs, they just got to be in their plain form. So they can be in pretty much any tense. They just got to be in the plain form. When we use it with e-adjectives, those have to be in their plain form as well, which just means the e-adjective itself. And finally, when we use this with nouns or not adjectives, we have the optional de aru that follows after it, which is very common in other grammar patterns as well. So we should be pretty much familiar with this kind of construction here. And so with that said, without further ado, let's do some example sentences of each of those things. Okay, so for our first example sentence, we're going to use a verb in its past plain form. So for our line, we have onaka o kawashita ni mo kakawarazu kare wa tabe suzuketa. And so what this line is going to translate to is basically, despite the fact that his stomach was hurting, he continued to eat. So let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have this kind of default phrasing, which is going to translate to literally kind of like broke his stomach, but the kind of natural translation is just stomach hurts or stomach ache. And so this is actually going to be the little phrasing or the clause that we use with this grammar pattern that we have in our hands here. So what we're just going to do is just going to add that phrase ni mo kakawarazu right after that. Onaka o kawashita ni mo kakawarazu is going to be basically despite the fact that his stomach was hurting or his stomach hurt. And right after that, we just end the sentence with the Y that happened in spite of that, which is he continued eating, which is of course something that's pretty unexpected when someone has a stomach ache, for them to continue eating the stuff that presumably gave him the stomach ache. So that's our Y there. We have the word kare, which just means he. We have wa, which is marking him as this topic. Then we have the compound verb tabe suzuketa, and that's just going to be to continue to eat in its past form, so continued eating. That's a grammar pattern in and of itself, using the premouse form of a verb plus the verb suzukeru, which means to continue. We have covered that before, so we'll add a little note here of that video in case you need a refresher. Alright, so that's our coverage of this grammar pattern with verbs. Now we're going to move on to an example with an e-adjective. So for our next example sentence, we have the line Shiken ga sugoku muzukashikatta にもかかわらずみんなは受かった. And what this line is going to translate to is just basically despite the fact that the test was really super difficult, everybody managed to pass. So let's break down this sentence real quick. First up, we have the word shiken, which is going to translate to test or exam. We have the ga marking as the subject right there. We have the adjective that it is, muzukashii, which is going to translate to hard or difficult. And so that's actually going to be the adjective that we're going to use in this example. We are first going to conjugate into its past form because we're talking about the past here. So the plain past form of that is going to be muzukashikatta. And we are then just going to plug in that Japanese phrasing right there, ni mo kakawarazu, to mean despite the fact that the test was really hard. Really hard. So forgot to say the sugoku, which is going to be an adverb. It is a common degree adverb that just means really or very. So if that modifies the word hard, that's just going to be very hard. Okay, so that pretty much covers the first part of the sentence. And so now what comes after is going to be the why. What happens despite the fact that X. And that's just going to be the short and simple minna wa ukatta. And that's just going to translate to everybody passed. We have the noun minna, which is going to translate to everybody. We have the wa marking them as the topic. And then we have the verb ukaru, which means to pass a test basically, and that's just going to be in its plain past form, so ukatta. And yeah, everybody passed the test despite the fact that it was really hard. 試験がすごく難しかったにもかかわらずみんなは受かった. Okay, so next up we're going to use this with a noun word, this grammar pattern with the noun word, and this is going to be the same rules for not adjectives, so we're going to skip an example with not adjective. Because this should pretty much cover the guidelines for that as well. So for our line, we have shinsotsu de aru ni mo kakawarazu, kare wa watashi yorimo oi ni kasegu. And so what this line is going to translate to is, despite the fact that he is a recent graduate, he is making much more money than I am. So let's break down this sentence bit by bit. First up, we have shinsotsu, which is going to be our noun that we use with this grammar pattern, and it's going to translate to recent graduate. We're going to add the phrasing de aru right after the noun, which is optional for this grammar pattern. We're just going to do it. And so that pretty much just sets up the noun for being used with this grammar pattern. So now we can just add that phrasing right there, ni mo kakawarazu. So shinsotsu de aru ni mo kakawarazu is going to be despite the fact that he is a recent graduate. And so there we go. Our X is established, the circumstances are established. So now what comes next is our Y, which is going to be something that's unexpected for a recent graduate. And that is going to be kare wa watashi yorimo oi ni kasegu, which is going to translate to he makes much more money than I do. So first up we see that we just start that with kare, which means he. We mark kare as the topic of the sentence now. Then we have watashi, which means I. And then we instigate the grammar pattern that is yori, which means basically more than. It's a comparative grammar pattern. So yorimo is going to be the emphatic version of yori. So more than me is what this is translating to so far. Or he more than me. Then now we get to the part of what he does that is more than I do. And so first up we have oi ni, and that's just going to be basically an adverb that means many or a lot. Then that's going to be modifying the verb, which is the verb that comes right after, which is kasegu, which means basically to earn an income. So oi ni kasegu is going to mean basically to earn a lot. So that's going to be added onto the part that says more than I do. So he makes a lot more money than I do. Bring everything together to get the full sentence once again. Shinsotsu de aru ni mo kakawarazu. Kare wa watashi yorimo oi ni kasegu, which is, again, despite the fact that he is a recent graduate, he makes a lot more money than I do. Wow, what nerve. Alright, we are now moving into our last example sentence using this grammar pattern, and what we're going to do is we're going to use this as basically the beginning of a sentence, kind of a transitional phrase. So for example, we have the line, 試合はもう決まっていた。にもかかわらずみんなは最後まで体をこうにした。And so what this line is going to translate to is basically the match was already decided. Nevertheless, everybody gave it their all until the very end. So let's break down this sentence bit by bit. First up, we have our first sentence. So Shiai is going to start the sentence off. That's going to translate to match or match. We have the particle ga marking as the subject of the first sentence. Then we have the particle mo, which is going to translate to already. Then we have the verb kimaru in its te form plus ita, which is going to basically mean has been decided. So the verb kimaru means basically to be decided. That's going to be the grammar pattern that is the te form plus the verb iru to mean something has been done and stays that way. Little annotation here if you need a refresher on that grammar pattern. And so that basically right there is going to be our first sentence as well as the X in our general construction here. So that's going to establish the circumstances. So the next sentence that is going to start with our phrasing ni mo kakawarazu is going to be something presented that is kind of unexpected given the circumstances of the match already being decided. And so what we get is ni mo kakawarazu minna wa saigo made karada o ko ni shita, which is going to be despite the fact that that is, or nevertheless, everybody gave it their all until the very end. So the beginning of that sentence, of course, is our phrasing, ni mo kakawarazu, to mean basically nevertheless, or in spite of that, in which that refers to the previous sentence. Next up, we have the word minna, which is going to mean everybody. This is implicitly everybody on the team. We have the particle wa marking them as the topic of the sentence. Then we have the word saigo made, which is going to be the noun saigo, which means end, and the particle made to mean until, so basically until the end. Then right after that, we finish this whole sentence up with the phrasing karada o ko ni suru. So this is basically an expression that means basically to give it your all, or to work until your body is grinded into pieces or something along those lines. And we're going to use the past form of that. So the suru at the end of it turns into shita. So karada o ko ni shita is basically just going to be they gave it their all. So let's bring back the whole sentence once again. Shiai ga mo kimatte ita ni mo kakawarazu minna wa saigo made karada o ko ni shita, which is going to translate to the match had already been decided, nevertheless everybody gave it their very all, or gave it their all until the very end. Okay, so that's gonna wrap up our last sentence as well as this video lesson. X ni mo kakawarazu Y to mean Y in spite of or despite X, or nevertheless X, Y. And yeah, hopefully you got a good idea of the guidelines, which were pretty straightforward, and you got a good sense of the context of how it's used with the example sentences. Again, this is pretty generally used in formal language, so you might not be coming across it too much, but nevertheless, ooh, I just used it myself. How ironic is that? Nevertheless, it is important to know. So I think I just proved that. So with that, I think this video lesson has proved its purpose. And yeah, thanks for watching. Tune in next time for another grammar lesson.